Hello everybody, and welcome to the Top 10 Albums of 1990. Josh Runquist here for Heavy Debriefings, and let's just get right into it. If you want to know the rules, they're in the description below. So let's start off with number 10. And one of the greatest live bands of all time, Gwar, with their universally loved album, Scumdogs of the Universe. While this is not the first Gwar album, it is in fact the sophomore album. This is the album where most people discovered the band. They really started to come into who they were, what they wanted to accomplish, and every song on this album is just a fun listen. Of course, you got their most legendary song, Sick of You, on this album. You also get to experience the band in a more proper sound. The production is so much better than Hello. The songwriting actually sounds more like songs on this album. And it feels like it's taken more seriously, but it's also just as funny at the same time. It's where the band really felt like they were becoming a band on this album. It's hard, it's heavy, it's just got everything that you would want in a Gwar album, especially at this time. And with Gwar, it's like they've gone through so many different changes. Punk, metal, prog, horror themes. There's so many different things that go into Gwar. And of course, the main reason you enjoy Gwar is the live show. And when you hear songs off Scumdogs of the Universe, you know you're in for a good time. And that's why it's number 10 on my top 10 albums of 1990. Number 9 is going to confuse a lot of people, but I'll explain. It is Ingve Malmsteen with Eclipse. Yes, one of the most light albums Ingve has ever put out. It's full of the hairband hits. He really doesn't go off the deep end with showing off his technical prowess. It just has quality songs. And if you appreciate that 80s glam sound, that hairband sound, but just done with a technical prowess, Ingve is the man to deliver on all of that in strides. But there's, on this album, it's not so much insane on the classical influences, the neoclassical influences, and just overall shred. It feels like Eclipse was more of a refined album, which you normally don't hear from the guy. Usually you get some songs that are just straight ahead, then you have some wacky, insane, jaw-dropping guitar solos or instrumental movements. On this album, pretty much from start to finish, just great solid hits from start to finish. And I don't see a lot of people talking about Eclipse, mainly because it is one of the lightest albums he ever put out. It's, there's not as many of the outrageous guitar solos and wankery that you would find from Ingve, and that's kind of what I appreciate about it. Just because you are a top-tier musician doesn't mean you have to show it on every single song. Sometimes, you just gotta let the music do the talking. And that's what I hear in Eclipse from Ingve Malmsteen. Number 8 is a band that is really underground when it comes to the progressive rock and progressive metal realms. But thankfully, I discovered them at a very poignant part in my life, and I was so happy to know that they came back together to be able to release some music a couple years ago. But of course, it had to start somewhere, and that's what happened with Psychotic Waltz and the album A Social Grace. Psychotic Waltz is just a little bit of everything in the prog world that a prog nerd like myself, or at least I used to be a prog nerd, maybe I still am, but everything that I'm looking for. It gets heavy in the right moments, it gets proggy in the right moments, it gets straight ahead in the right moments, and it's got some left of center moments you wouldn't really expect. Mainly, you don't expect to hear flute in a band like this, maybe more in Jethro Tull, but not in something like Psychotic Waltz. And while those moments are a little bit few and far between on this album, they are something that you're either gonna love or hate or think is okay. And for me, I think it fits the music seamlessly. It makes them stand out. The vocal range is absolutely insane on this album. The songwriting is good and heavy, and fantastic production. And if you're not familiar with Psychotic Waltz, I think you should really check them out if you like that 80s and 90s progressive metal. Whether you like anything from Fate's Warning, Queensryche, Dream Theater, King's X, even Galactic Cowboys, I think there's something you can appreciate about Psychotic Waltz. And I think a fine starting point, if you want to get into the early stuff, would be A Social Grace. Now, coming in at number 7 is Exorder with Slaughter at the Vatican. Oh, I'm sorry, did I accidentally say a band that reunited and is currently going on tour? Anyways, yes. If you are familiar with anything about Exorder, you know that either Pantera was inspired or ripped off Exorder to be able to create their sounds from Cowboys from Hell onward. More specifically, in the realms of, vulgar display of power, and yeah, it's undeniable. And all you have to do is just hear Slaughter at the Vatican to realize that. It's got that really heavy thrash metal, groove metal sound, and I will sit here and say it, Exorder, I enjoy more than Pantera. I do. I really do. And Slaughter at the Vatican is just a great, heavy display of... Sorry. I was almost going for a pun there. But no, just the production is just raw enough, but clear. The songwriting is nice and heavy. And it was sad to see Exorder pretty much break up after 2 albums. Of course, they're back now, and they've been doing some great touring and stuff like that. Just seeing a band like this and how big they could have been had they been able to stay together, it really makes you sad and think about what could have been. But when I go back to Slaughter at the Vatican, it just brings me back to a more simpler time of what I liked about heavy music. Almost death metal, but that great thrash and groove sound that so many people tried to replicate and try to revolutionize on. But there's only one band that truly did it right in this way, and that, of course, is Exorder. And I highly recommend checking out Slaughter at the Vatican if this sounds like something you need to check out, or if you just want to see what all the hubbub is about and how Pantera got their latter-day sound. Coming in at number 6 is one of the greatest death metal bands of all time, with Entombed and Left Hand Path. Yes, Entombed pretty much signifies everything that I love about death metal. They're just heavy enough. They don't need to do blast beats, they don't need to do constant double bass, they don't need to show over-the-top technical wankery. They just make fast, heavy songs when they want to. They make more slower, brooding songs when it feels appropriate. And they just went out of their way to try to make every single album sound the best that it possibly could be, and write for the songs, not just what they were capable of. And Left Hand Path is the reason why the Swedish death metal sound became so huge. And of course the Boss Metal Zone H2 pedal. You know what I'm talking about. You know. But seriously, folks, this is my kind of death metal, and I love it when bands still make the sound to this day. And there are ones that do it, and that's not a shot at more technical death metal, that's not a shot at any other things, but when it comes to just that old school death metal sound, Left Hand Path is just a perfect example of what I love about death metal. And you just might as well. If you've never checked it out, or if you just need to listen to it again, I highly recommend checking out Left Hand Path by Entombed. Number 5 is one of the most underrated thrash metal bands of all time, Sacred Reich with The American Way. Yes, this is my kind of crossover thrash band. I mean, that perfect combination of thrash and punk mixed together, and of course with very left-leaning lyrics that just hit home with me. And I really appreciate everything that they've done. I think my favorite release from the band, and I don't think that's any shock to anybody, is the Surf Nicaragua EP. But The American Way might be the best Sacred Reich album of that classic era of the band. I would even dare say that some of their newer material is their best work. But if you're looking for the older stuff, I mean, The American Way is just, from start to finish, just that perfect kind of thrash, punk crossover that so many people love, just like myself, and you might as well too. It gets fast and heavy when it needs to be, it's got that great mid-tempo groove that I love so much, the lyrics are so poignant, and it's just an album that feels like it was meant for me, even though I was 2 years old when this came out. But yes, if you need more crossover thrash, and there's no reason why you don't, I highly recommend checking out Sacred Reich and The American Way. Coming in at number 4 is another one of the most underrated thrash metal bands of all time. And I often think about what the world could have been like had Death Angel been a part of the Big Four? Of course, they started after those bands, but what if they were the one that gained popularity more than Anthrax or Slayer or Megadeth? I mean, Metallica wasn't going to happen. I mean, like, Metallica's Metallica as far as popularity, but what if Death Angel and Testament and Exodus and Overkill, Dark Angel, what if all these bands were the ones to rise to the top? And if there was any chance for them to do it, I think Act 3 would have been that perfect time for it. Act 3, as the name implies, is the third album from Death Angel, and especially for that classic era of the band before they broke up and then got back together and started releasing their best material to date, Act 3 is the best of that classic era. Yeah, whether you want fast stuff, whether you want mid-tempo grooves, a little bit of slower stuff going on as well too, although not too much, it just feels like one of the most well-rounded thrash metal albums of the era. It's got a little bit of everything, it's got that nice variety to it, and for someone who doesn't just want to hear the same song over and over again, it feels like an album meant for me. And of course the song Stop, I think, is one of the most underrated thrash metal songs of all time. This is something that more thrash metal people need to hear. I think Death Angel is just one of those bands that more people need to hear. And if you've never checked them out, if you've heard them in the past and you forgot about them, or if you just need a re-listen, which I'm probably going to do after this, seriously, go check out Act 3 by Death Angel, and check out one of the most underrated thrash metal albums of all time. Coming in at number 3 is arguably the best album of their career. And if you don't agree with me, you gotta at least admit it's in the top 3 to 5. Yes, of course, I am talking about Judas Priest with Painkiller. Their fastest album, one of the most legendary drum intros of all time with the title track. So many great fast, heavy songs on here, and especially when they needed to do something after Turbo Lover, they took all the criticism off that, even though, in time, I've learned to really appreciate Turbo Lover. This was the album they needed to make after that. If Turbo Lover is essentially a pop album, this is almost a black metal, death metal, thrash metal album. Of course, done in the style of Judas Priest. And they've had heavier songs since then, but this feels like the heaviest Judas Priest album. And of course, after this, Rob Halford decided to do a little bit of sabbatical and start doing some things that you would not expect, and hey, might even show up in my 90s list coming up later. Wink wink, nudge nudge. But in all seriousness, every song off this album rules. And it's not just Painkiller and a bunch of filler. Every song off this album rules. And I wish this was an album that they would perform live. I'm not sure if they could, feasibly do that nowadays. I mean, especially with how many hits that they have and everyone getting older and, just the absolute screams it takes to make this. Even though Halford still has the chops, I don't know if he could do Painkiller consistently for a full tour. I would still love to see it, though. And yeah, if you just need a reminder that Painkiller is more than just the one song, seriously, check out Painkiller. It's one of those great albums of the 90s that doesn't get the full recognition for how great the entire album is, and not just one song. The top 2 here, I've been going back and forth between these two, and I think I finally picked an order that I will be happy with. And with it, at number 2, it is Suicidal Tendencies with Lights, Camera, Revolution. This album is a battle cry for me, especially with the song You Can't Bring Me Down. I needed this song in my life, and it helped me through a lot of dark times when I was younger. Even though, obviously, I'm not a West Coast guy, I haven't gone through all the same things that, Psycho Myko and Rocky and everyone else in Suicidal at the time went through. There is so many great emotions that you can relate to on this album. Whether it's mental struggles, whether it's religion, whether it's just the world around you. It's all covered on this album. And it does have some of the greatest solos, not just of 1990, not just of crossover thrash, but I think in metal in general. And I know, you may agree, you may not agree, But Rocky leaving Suicidal was a really sad moment, and I feel like after Rocky left, they never were able to hit those fine moments of what I loved about Suicidal again. Rocky is a huge part of that early day sound, and I was sad to see him go. But when you listen to Lights Camera Revolution, you know that his music is always going to be there. And of course, he went on to do some other great music as well too, but just a combination of everything that happened with Suicidal, especially after getting a couple albums in, figuring out the sound that they wanted to go for, and creating one of the greatest crossover thrash albums of all time, you can't go wrong with Lights Camera Revolution. And finally, at number 1, well, what could it be? Is it Spiritual Healing by Death? Actually, no. It is Queensryche with Empire. Between this and Operation Mindcrime, I go back and forth as to what my favorite Queensryche album is, but even though I love the prog, I love the story, and I love concept albums, I think I have to go with Empire over Operation Mindcrime. There's so many great songs on this album. And yeah, I can make the case for Operation Mindcrime all day long. But I feel like Empire was the greater collection of just great, solid songs. They don't have to be interconnected, they just had to be good. And from start to finish, it feels like this is the pinnacle of Queensryche's career until Digital Noise Alliance in 2022, which is in the top 3 Queensryche albums of all time. But with Empire, yeah, I mean, whether you want something a little bit heavier, whether you want something a little more mainstream, I mean, how can you go wrong with Jet City Woman? Seriously, it is that good. And it still has those great proggy moments that are going along with it as well. Empire is just one of those albums that was that perfect 1-2 punch with Operation Mindcrime and then Empire. Especially when it comes to prog, how many other bands were able to hit that level of popularity and be able to have 2 of the most successful prog metal albums of all time right next to each other? Tapered off until Todd LaFleur joined the band. But yes, of course, Empire by Queensryche is my favorite album of 1990. And if you like that late 80s, early 90s sound of progressive rock, progressive metal, a little bit of glam and hair metal going on, a little bit of pop rock, but overall just that great feeling that you can get from this style of music, yeah, I implore you to check out Queensryche's Empire. And that does it, folks. Thank you so much for sticking around for this whole list of the best albums of 1990. Tune in next week where, of course, we're going to keep going in chronological order as I tackle one of the best years in metal, 1991. And until then, this is Josh Ronquist for Heavy Debriefings saying, see ya.